Welcome to Independent Television. My name is Geordie Greig. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of The Independent. And my guest today is William Hague, one of the most prominent Conservative politicians, former Foreign Secretary, a figure of great authority as a columnist on The Times, and now running to be Chancellor of the University of Oxford. William, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
800 years ago, there was the first Chancellor. What are you going to bring to the picture after that long legacy in history?
It has changed quite a bit in 800 years, yes. I mean, originally the Chancellor was sorting out how the city and the university worked and was a figure of great authority. And then it's gone through many changes over all that time. These days, the Vice-Chancellor runs the university. So the Chancellor does not do that. But the Chancellor is the head of the university and expresses the values of the university and is responsible for leading the choice of the Vice-Chancellor.
What are you personally going to have, which is going to give you the edge over other candidates? And we'll talk about the other candidates, and there's one obviously particular candidate who is running against you from a very
Well,
different
for me,
party.
Oxford transformed my life. I turned up from a comprehensive school in South Yorkshire when I was 18 years old, 17 for the interview. I didn't know anybody in the city of Oxford. No one in my family had ever been to university before. And I feel that all the things I've gone on to do in life, a lot of that I attribute to Oxford. And I have retained the involvement in Oxford ever since then. So when Oxford was running out of money, some years after I and you left Oxford, in the late 80s, Oxford really was running out of money. And they came to the firm I was working for at the time saying, how do we do an appeal for funds? And I volunteered to do the work. And we set up the Campaign for Oxford, which has gone on to raise billions of pounds for Oxford and completely transform its financial situation. And I helped design that. And I've gone back to teach as a fellow of my college regularly on history and politics. So I've always retained Oxford is my heart and soul is in Oxford. But the other thing is that the crucial thing is that in the next decade, which is what this is for, this is an election for someone to serve for the next 10 years, what happens in Oxford is critical to the future of the whole country. And I think it needs a Chancellor who will explain that, who will articulate that. The people noticed it in COVID. Oh, the vaccine came from Oxford because they had all that expertise. Well, there are things going on there across science and technology critical to the future.
So we'll come on to the broad advantages of Oxford being strong. But let's go back to when you arrived, not knowing a soul. Was it quite intimidating? I mean, was it quite a posh place with most of the students?
Yes.
And did you feel patronised or?
No, Norrie, it was a posh place with its own traditions. And in most of the colleges, including mine, women were only just being admitted for the first time. So it had a very male public school atmosphere. So that was a bit strange to me. However, I've never felt intimidated by that. In fact, I've always thought it was an advantage in life to have gone to a school where there were 1,800 pupils, in my case, and 900 of those were girls. So actually, I was much more used to more social variety, more diversity, if you like, although we wouldn't have called it that then.
But it was quite Bridesheadian at that time.
It was.
Hugh Grant was there.
It was the time of Brideshead.
Nigella Lawson were contemporaries of yours?
Yes.
Did you know them? Was that a...
No, I didn't know them. So there will have been social circles I didn't mix in. But I never actually found that holding me back. I became president of the union and did all sorts of other things in Oxford. So as I say, I always thought it was quite an advantage to have come from to have been well grounded, if you like, to have come from the Yorkshire coalfield and turned up there from a school where nobody had been to Oxford for a very long time. I didn't have all those pre-existing friendships, and I wasn't in all the posh dining clubs that have become so notorious since, everybody knows.
Probably saved your career.
Yes, yeah, exactly. The Bullingdon Club and all that. That was not my scene at all.
Were you aware of that going on?
Yes, a little bit, yes. But I wouldn't say that dominated Oxford life even then. And I made lifelong friendships there. So I'm a huge believer in Oxford. And the other reason I'm standing is I think just as I was instrumental in the original development campaign for Oxford to raise money, it needs bigger endowment now. We have to ensure that students can get to Oxford irrespective of background at a time when tuition fees are going to be going up again, as the new government have announced. So that means raising more endowment to be able to support people to go to Oxford. And for that, you need to know America, because that is where the wealth is in the world today, and the culture of giving the wealth. So they need a chancellor who knows America, and I know America very well.
Well, you say you know America, and of course you do, but your biggest challenger is a man who may be the ambassador for Britain in America. Is it a job which someone can do from 3,000 miles away, or do you think that is a job, that is a distance too far?
Well, let me put it this way. That's not how I would approach it. I don't want to criticize any other candidates. People must make their own judgment. But my approach...
No, but people do want your view on this, because you've fought elections.
I'm going to give my view of how I regard it. And how I regard it is that it's necessary, if you're the Chancellor, to be able to go there frequently. You know, so the recent Chancellor, Chris Patten, has been several dozen times a year to events in Oxford, not only to the big ceremonies, but to do college fundraising events and to celebrate success in Oxford. So it is important to be accessible and to be there. So personally, I don't regard it as compatible.
I think you're very diplomatically saying...
Well, I am diplomatically saying, yes, that it's not compatible with a full-time employment in another country. Yeah. Is as gentle as I can put it.
But you're used to quite ungentle elections. This is a characteristic of.
But this is a different election. You know, this is not meant to be like a general election. It's not a political choice. It's really important that whoever is the Chancellor can work across parties. And which I have done, and all the papers I've written with Tony Blair in recent times, you know, and in the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict initiative that I launched, I'm used to working across parties. So it's not a political election, and it's not an election where we should do each other down. The election has to enhance the reputation of the University of Oxford. Just like that's also a key part of the job of the next Chancellor, to enhance the reputation. No. So that's why I'm being more diplomatic than I might have been in elections in the past.
I can sense that. Peter Mandelson has described the job quite flippantly as you are merely going to be, or he is merely going to be, a ceremonial figurehead. Is that a little bit dismissive of a role which goes back to such people as the Duke of Wellington having that role, Archbishop Laud?
Some of them have only been ceremonial figureheads, but the job has changed since then. It's changed in the last 20 years. And of course, it does include going to ceremonies and being the figurehead. That's an essential part, which also requires physical presence, of course, in the country and in the university. But these days, it involves much more, actually. It involves, as I said, many fundraising events, many celebrations of Oxford. And in my view, I go back to what I was saying about articulating to the country what Oxford is. Because, you know, I would like to be doing things like this with you and other people and podcasts and so on if I was the Chancellor, explaining Oxford, the brilliance of people in Oxford across different fields, because they're doing the work on nuclear fusion and quantum encryption and biologically sourced materials that might replace plastic. And then it's how you merge all of these things in AI with ethics and philosophy and language and history. And this is Oxford. And so it's going to be really important to be active and energetic in explaining that.
Those are the high notes. I absolutely get it. It can be a transformative laboratory for our country. It can be a challenger sense of people being given empowerment to do great things. It's complicated, universities today. So what are your views on students demanding safe places?
I'm not a fan of what they mean by that. Of course, students must be...
Do you want to explain what it means to you and why you're not a fan of that?
It's really important that students are safe physically. But we should not cater too much to the idea of safe psychological spaces, or spaces that are safe from debate. or controversial opinion. In fact, my own experience of Oxford was the very opposite of that, of constantly debating in the Oxford Union, differing points of view, of even being ready at a moment's notice to take the opposite point of view, to show that you could actually understand the opposite point of view. So I think an important part of learning is hearing things that make you uncomfortable, hearing things that actually make you question many of the assumptions with which you arrived at university.
And this notion of trigger warnings before Shakespeare and other controversial areas of within a play or within an art show?
I don't go in for that. No, I don't think that's necessary. I think people have, for 500 years, people have been coping with with seeing these things. So no, I think it's very important to, in Oxford and in all universities, to get ready for the debating chambers of the world, not echo chambers of like-minded people. Where people stop hearing contrary opinions.
And if you'd been Chancellor in the last year or so, the determination of whether Cecil Rhodes should have his statue pulled down because of his links to slavery, where do you stand on this great debate of reparation and apologizing and facing up to some terrible things which did happen?
Well, they are terrible things. And in fact, one of the books that I've written was The Life of William Wilberforce, great Yorkshire Member of Parliament, who was in Parliament, led the campaign.
And the great abolitionist.
To abolish the slave trade. So that's been a big thing in my own life and study of the world, the horrors of the slave trade, the efforts in Britain to abolish it. But that does not mean that we reject the learning from the history of people who took a different view in previous ages, because they were creatures of their time. And Wilberforce was one of those who led that change and was a fantastic leader as a result.
I get that, but I want to come back to you to what's today. There are going to be some difficult decisions made by those
There are
who...
difficult decisions.
You are going to be on the side of people having to face sensitive subjects and not be what some people have termed a snowflake generation.
Yeah, it will be important not to be a snowflake generation, because the world we're heading into now is a pretty dangerous world. Look at recent political events, where the world is getting more dangerous, with more polarization. People have to be ready for that. They have to be equipped for that. So no, we mustn't have a snowflake generation. Of course, the standards and times change as well. So I don't think anyone would say every statue that's ever been put up has got to stay there. If there were statues of Hitler still up in Germany, we would say no, but really, you ought to take those down. So of course, our times change. We adjust our street furniture for that. But on the whole, we should remember that we have to learn from history. That does not mean that we extinguish the memory of everything that we disagree with, however much we disagree with.
And history, even as a syllabus, is a controversial subject. What filter it should go through? Does it go through race, chronology, kings, queens? What's your view on the traditional or turning history upside down so it comes through a different filter?
You do have to look at it both ways. I have a huge sympathy with the fact that history, to really understand history, you have to understand social and economic conditions. But you also have to know about those kings or those dictators, because even in our own age, individual leaders wield enormous power and change the course of history. I do belong to the school of thought that sometimes the individual changes the course of history.
Would you have a narrative history? That's been the great debate, whether you go from king to king, or do you come in and say you see it through a gender perspective, a race perspective?
I don't think there is the real trick is to combine all of these things. But my own history, the history I've written and the way I personally, and by the way, the Chancellor will not be setting the history syllabus, but my own approach is more narrative, because I think you need the knowledge of history and of events in order to interpret it. It's not really true, I think, that the skills of interpretation can be acquired in the absence of knowledge, in the abstract. You really do have to know what happened in what year and what century, as far as best as we can determine now.
Now, you may be able to influence because you will have a voice, a different voice from the previous jobs you've had. Cambridge was quite controversial in loading the entrance to give more favour to working class teenagers to gain access. Do you think Oxford is still too privileged? Do you think, would you like to see the balance changed to allow more working class entrance?
It's been very important that it has changed, compared to, you were asking me about when I arrived. And it's now there are far more state school pupils at Oxford. It goes up and down from year to year. COVID hasn't helped.
Would you load it?
But people should get in on their interview and their quote, irrespective of where they come from. Now, that requires a lot of judgment by admissions tutors and so on, but I don't think there is any magic number. It will be very good if that we continue to see the advance of state schools in university places. I've had some good meetings with the 93% Club, which is the student organization that celebrates the 93% like me who came from state schools in the population as a whole. Oxford and Cambridge aren't anywhere near 93% yet. But it's also important not to discriminate against somebody just because they didn't go to a state school.
Did you work hard when you were there?
I did in the end. I played hard.
Let's pause that.
Yeah.
In the end. So what happened in the beginning?
At the beginning, I had quite a good time, and I stood for election to everything that anyone could stand for election to, virtually. So I was very busy with all that. Learned about the practice of politics a lot. But then I put on a spurt I immersed myself in the academic side at the very end.
And what was your degree at the end?
I did get a first, but I don't want to make people feel sick about that because I only worked to the end. However, I've always thought that the practical experience and academic study are a really good combination. That is true, that's true in physics, but it's also true in politics, as it turns out.
Now, your political experience is obviously going to be a big advantage. You've got an address book which goes from probably Moscow to Madagascar with leaders.
Yeah, the Moscow bit isn't very useful at the moment since I'm sanctioned by Russia.
Let's talk about America. We've just had Donald Trump elected. You have been very firm on this. You said we all need Trump to lose. He represents a dark cult that threatens freedom everywhere. His foul diatribe against those who cross him and refusal to accept legitimate election results makes him a threat to democracy. Do you stand by that?
Yes, absolutely. Of course, the UK has to work with whoever is the President of the United States. But thankfully, I'm not the government of the UK. But we can all have our opinion about it. And I think the appointments that have been announced in the last few days do suggest that I might be right.
Take us to explain to the viewers what those appointments are and why they are abhorrent to you.
Well, there are some of the appointments, such as to Director of National Intelligence, are people who've said very favourable things about Russia before. The Defence Secretary is going to be a Fox News host, nothing against news hosts, of course, but somebody who hasn't run a major organisation or the military.
But again, explain you're giving me facts rather than views. What does it matter to you that there's a bias towards Russia and there's a populist right-wing TV presenter? Is this unserious government? Is this going to undo serious governance?
Well, it's several things. Yeah, partly it is about serious governance because government does require some experience and understanding, particularly of how to make large organizations work. But there's something much bigger, of course, which affects all of us, which is what will happen in Europe including Britain, because although we've left the EU, we haven't actually gone anywhere. We are still part of Europe, the continent of Europe. And there is a desperate crisis going on in Ukraine. And we don't know exactly what the Trump administration will do, but there are a lot of noises have come out of the Trump side as they come in, very skeptical about supporting Ukraine, much more favorable to Russia. And if Ukraine collapses and is not able to function as a sovereign country in the future, there are serious consequences to that in Europe and in Britain. And then there is the whole trade policy side of it, because if there is a trade war between the United States and the EU, the UK is caught in the middle of that, and that will affect jobs here in the UK. So it is not just how it matters to me, it matters to everybody in Britain. So now, but he's been elected fair and square, and the UK government has to find the best way to work with that.
So how will this affect the Conservative Party? Will they potentially lurch to the right to replicate Trump's success and move closer to Farage?
Well, I hope not. I think that would be a mistake. I mean, it's not something I would agree with anyway. And I think to me, it's not really being conservative to advocate huge budget deficits, to move against free trade, to refuse to defend a democratic nation under attack. You know, that's not, Ronald Reagan wouldn't recognize that as being conservative. Margaret Thatcher wouldn't recognize that as being conservative. So I really wouldn't want the Conservative Party to go in that direction.
They've got to ditch Farage in the end. They've got to have a strong enough identity to win the centre-right vote, having discarded him.
Yes, basically, yes. The Conservative Party will, I don't think the Conservatives will win future elections by just trying to be a version of the Reform Party. People voted against the Conservatives for many, many reasons after 14 years in office. But one of them was they didn't think the Conservatives were competent anymore, irrespective of right-wing or left-wing. And when you actually look at the surveys of the people who didn't vote Conservative in the election, those who voted Labour or Liberal Democrat, of whom there were many, not just people who voted Reform, are actually potentially more likely to be won back again than the people who voted for Reform. So the Conservative Party really has to make sure it's in a position to win back those people who voted Labour and Liberal. And then it might in the future also win back the people who voted Reform.
So you became Tory leader after Tony Blair's 1997 landslide, but lost the 2001 election by another landslide, and then you left the role as leader. The Tories had two more leaders then, Ian Duncan Smith and Michael Howard, and lost a total of 3 elections before Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010. By that reckoning, the Tories won't be back in power until 2037. Can Kemi Badenoch do any better?
Yes, she can. She can. I mean, hopefully she'll do better than me in many respects. But there's a big factor, of course, here that is not within her control and wasn't within mine, which is that I was up against the most popular government that we've had in Britain for a long time. I mean, I've mentioned how I've teamed up with Tony Blair. I've decided the least successful part of my life was opposing him. So now we work together on a lot of issues on science and AI and biotech, trying to urge people in all political parties to understand that's where the growth is in the future. But at that time...
Come back to Kemi.
Yes, at that time, of course, the Conservative Party couldn't get any traction because Blair in office was extremely popular. This is a different situation. And actually the main determinant of the opportunities you have as an opposition leader is how is the government doing? And the Labour government now have become unpopular very, very quickly. In fact, Conservatives are even slightly in the lead in some opinion polls already, just having lost the election only 4 months ago. Well, that is not a luxury that I was ever able to enjoy. So they have a bigger opportunity. That does not mean it's easy, though. And here I have to be a bit more discouraging, if you like, or challenging to the Conservatives, which is you still have to change. People will remember why they voted out a government. They don't just forget in 4 years. So the Conservatives do have to do the hard work of rethinking conservatism for a new decade.
Is Kemi the person to do that?
Well, I hope so. She is. I mean, I thought she was. I voted for her when we came down to the last choice, and she is. She's certainly a person people find very interesting, quite rightly.
Is she the new Maggie, as some people claim?
Well, we'll see. I think it would be. I don't think we should claim anything. It's too early to claim anything like that.
You got claimed by Maggie very early on as the potential for great political.
Yes, well, that never did me any good. So I won't claim that from Kemi Badenoch, but she's had the very good sense, which is one of the key reasons I voted for her in the contest with Robert Jenrick, to say, well, we start from values and principles. Don't rush into policies. Now, this is very smart because, again, we're in the fastest age of change ever in our lives, actually probably ever in the lives of any humans in the next decade. And all kinds of policies will be obsolete. You know, there are laws are being passed by the new government about working, the rights of people at work. But they're dealing with issues of the last decade or two. There were many new issues about how AI is affecting work in the next few years, and political parties are going to have to respond to that kind of.
Oxford's going to be lucky to get you if they can see the qualities which you can exude with a love of scholarship, a love of fighting for what you believe, a moral sensibility, and with the mantle of an elder statesman on the political landscape. One of the things which always struck me is how you got the better of Tony Blair in PMQs. He may have won the elections.
He did win the elections.
But you did often beat him in that chamber. How did that come about?
Well, I have always enjoyed debating. You know, I started at 13. I went to a comprehensive school, but they had us standing up debating in English classes when I was 13 years old. So I did arrive in Oxford with a debating and speaking mentality, and then did all that at Oxford. So by the time I get to the House of Commons, that's what I do. I debate in a formal setting. So I've always enjoyed that. Also, I realized I had really nothing else going for me at all. You know, with the Conservatives were down and out. The reputation of the party was terrible. Nobody was interested in the opposition at all. So how was I going to lay a glove on the other side, on Tony Blair and the Labour Party? Well, at least I could show every Wednesday that I could out-argue them, that I could get the better of them in a debate. I could even make them laugh at themselves about some of the ridiculous situations they're in. So I was very motivated by that, to show that although he was a dominant political leader, I could still tackle him on the floor of the House.
And is there a particular part of the Oxford curriculum, I'm imagining it's history, which you're going to be particularly interested in?
Well, it's really important for a chancellor, as I mentioned, to cherish all disciplines, really. Now, what am I? You can tell, talking to me, you know what I'm interested in. Yes, I love history, and I've written 2 history books. These days, though, I have really, in the last few years, hopefully understood that in order to appreciate what's going to happen in the future and to understand geopolitics and economics and business trends now, you really have to be on top of science and technology. So I'm not a scientist, and I regret really that in my time, you really had to choose at 14. You know, I think there's a strong case for the International Baccalaureate in secondary education, with a broader education, because I had to drop my physics and biology when I was 14 years old. And that now, I find all that area absolutely fascinating.
It's going to be quite gladiatorial if it comes down to, as the feeling is, it'll be you versus Peter Mandelson.
It might not be, but there are 5 candidates.
There are 5 candidates, but the bookies and the common wisdom is that you are the 2 most prominent likely to garner votes. What gives you the edge over him?
Well, I'm honestly not running against other candidates.
Well, you are.
In this election. No, but no, that's not how I'm thinking of it. I respect all the other candidates. And if people judge that they're better, they should be elected. You know, it's not that sort of election. So the world will come to an end if you don't vote for me. That's it. This is a different sort of thing. What gives me why do I think I ought to be elected? Why am I standing, despite the fact there are other good candidates for the position? Well, it's that long experience of fundraising and commitment to Oxford, and that I think I could have a good shot at articulating to the world what Oxford is about and why it needs Oxford.
Listen, you're a very strong voice. You're an extraordinary advocate for things you believe in. It can be read every week in your column, and you're a dignified fighter. You don't like getting too down and dirty. There was a slight dig at you by Mandelson, if I can come back to this. You know, we said it's time the Oxford Chancellor was not a white male Conservative. Clearly, he was pointing the finger at Lord Hague of Richmond.
Well, there are two things to say to that, you know, without criticising anybody. I stress.
Not that we want to do that.
But just responding, of course, there are things to say to that. One is that it's very important, it's the best candidate, irrespective of their politics or their gender. It's not a political position. It's a position where you have to work across parties. So to think of somebody as a Labour Chancellor or as a Tory Chancellor is a fundamental misunderstanding of the position. And the other thing, of course, is that there have been good Chancellors who were not Tory. You know, they were white males, but they were not Tory. Roy Jenkins was one of the greatest figures in the Labour Party of the last 100 years.
And he quashed Edward Heath and Robert
yes.
Blake, the historian, who was
exactly.
sent packing.
And so, you know, the idea it's always been a Tory who's been the Chancellor is not historically correct.
Let's end with, William, if you could talk to the 28,000 or so voters who are going to decide who becomes the next Chancellor in the 800th year of this historic role, what's your simple message, what William Hague will do and why it matters to you?
Well, my heart and soul are in Oxford. And there's a really important job to be done of explaining Oxford to the world and of making sure it's well funded for the future. And the experiences I've had over the last 40 years since leaving Oxford have equipped me to do that. But I stress that if people think there are a better candidate, they should elect them. You know, this is, they should come to that view. They should read the statements. Each candidate has prepared a statement. All I would ask people to do is to read those statements and come to a view as to who should be the next Chancellor.
Well, it is famously the city of dreaming spires, and you must hope that your dream to lead the university does become a reality. William Hague, we wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.